What is up? Welcome to the American Peloton. I am Jonathan Crane. I am a mediocre Cat 2 cyclist out of Birmingham, Alabama.
And I'm Ben, head coach at Skyway Cycling and team director at Skyway, presented by Domestique Coffee. It's been a little while.
Yeah, and we've got a couple of good races to talk about, both in Colorado, weirdly, and
Yep.
back-to-back weekends. I think this is going to be a pretty zippy episode. We're getting to the point of the season where I actually like this part of the season as a viewer because I'm kind of done racing so much, so I have a little bit more bandwidth to pay attention. And we're in this kind of like last chance saloon thing where like I feel like the racing, I don't know if it necessarily gets more exciting, but you get like some people who are very desperate for a result because they haven't had one, like making some interesting things happen because some people have
Yep.
accomplished their goals and they're I don't want to say checked out, but like not as hungry as they were at the beginning of the season, and you get some interesting things happening.
Yeah, for sure. And we see that, especially at Littleton with some of the craziness that was happening in both the men's and women's races.
Yeah, Littleton was, I think, maybe just on the men's side, the best of the ACC series we've seen. I
Yep.
think let's just go chronologically. So we're gonna start with Littleton going back a couple of weeks. We're gonna start with the women's race because chronologically that is how they ran this race. At first glance, we were like, "Is there anything to talk about here?" Because it was kind of, it wasn't like the most dynamic race. It seemed like it was just kind of pretty fast the whole time, and people were getting shelled off the back in ones and twos. This was the first race at altitude, and I get the sense that the altitude played a huge factor in both races. I think maybe even more so for the women's, just because budgets on the women's side are not as big. Not as many of the women are like racing as their primary thing. So I think you've got more of them that are maybe having to come up the day before the race and stuff like that. I wonder if that put like a rev limiter on the race itself a little bit.
Yeah, there was definitely a little bit less attacking that we normally see in the women's races. Usually there's a lot of like DNA and stuff trying to get up the road, and there was still that, but it was a little bit less like aggressive, if that makes sense.
From like a physiological standpoint though, like that's kind of what altitude does like when you're not
Yep.
acclimated to it though, right? Is it puts
Yep.
a ceiling on kind of your like anaerobic
A little
ability.
bit, a little bit, and then it also makes it extremely hard to recover from that. So like when you're hitting that anaerobic capacity, you're it takes so long to come back down from it, or sometimes you don't come back down from it, and you're just if you think about it, you have like kind of half your match book if you want to
Right.
like liken it to that. So
Yeah.
it makes
I,
it tough.
that's
People have to be
that's
more selective.
for sure. And that's definitely like what the race looked like. There weren't as many big swings, and there was a thing that we've been talking about, which is that the Miami Knights team, still Knights
Yeah.
and Blazers, got to be more
Yep.
specific. The Miami Knights team really kind of has a chokehold on these races. They've got the lead on the women's side with Paulo Munoz, and they've really had these races in a little bit of a stranglehold in a sense that like they don't let anything up the road without their riders in it, and sometimes even with their riders in it, they keep the field on a good leash. If it's like they're really only letting things go if it's one of their riders solo, and in that
Yep.
case, the other teams now like Legion only had two here, DNA only had two here, but sometimes that makes those teams more willing to work together when there are several of the stronger teams that have lower numbers. I think that makes them go like, all right, let's get together and like rotate together to bring these things back because we
Yep.
have the strength and we want to be there. But so we can't let Miami roll away from us.
Right, for sure. Like Miami was doing, even if they had a solo person up the front, sometimes they were bringing it back if it wasn't like Taylor Cook White. Like
Yeah,
they were like very clear, like if it's not these two people on our team by themselves, then we're bringing it back. Which kind of made the racing, in my opinion, a little bit negative, just because it was very, not a lot of things happening, and if something did happen, it got shut down really quick.
sure. Yeah, it was not a bad race by any means, and I do want to point out the most aggressive riding. Okay, I want to like introduce a whole new concept, and I did not warn you at all that I was going to do this, but
All right, all right.
uh there's no like most aggressive rider jersey. So I'm open to another name for this, but I want to introduce for a rider like we're looking at right now. We're watching the replay as we're talking about it a little bit. Caroline Mani from Groove Subaru, Mani and a couple of riders from that I guess formerly Alpha Groove Subaru, maybe now it's just called Groove Subaru
Mhm.
cyclocross team were at this race, but like Colorado based team. And Mani is a French cyclocross racer. She was second. She's raced like at the world level. She was second in the Kokside Belgium Worlds in 2016. Second
That's a
in the
brutal course too. Yeah,
yeah, second
that's no
in
joke. Second at that race is crazy.
yeah. You can't just luck into that. So like one of the best cross racers in the world relocated to Colorado, but a lot of cross racers in this. But Mani was here with not a ton of team support, and just every time it got slow, she was taking a rip off the front. Didn't come away with a big result for that, but I want to, there's no award for that in these races. There's no
Right.
combativity award, so I want to introduce our show when we see one of those. Let's start handing them out ourselves. So for this show, I'm definitely not, or for this race on the women's side, I am nominating Caroline Mani for the American Peloton Combativity Award.
Yeah, I won't argue with you there. I think yeah, I mean, just sending so much, doing so much work, it's hard to argue with that. On a different note, there is a rider who I do want to acknowledge because early in the year she broke her collarbone and hasn't been able to kind of put a real race together since. Is Paige Kostanecki.
Yeah,
She was riding the front a lot in this race and like really doing a lot of work for Butcher Box early on, and it was really awesome to see her put a solid race together, whether there was a result tied to it or not.
yeah, she definitely was doing a lot of the hard work to bring some of the breaks back for Butcher Box and
Yeah.
put them in a good position for the finish. There was one. There were a couple moments in this, like later, I guess, post 30 minutes in this race, where I thought maybe something was going to roll because it had just been so hard for so long, and they were at altitude. And
Yeah.
there was definitely one that I thought maybe she was going to get in, but I don't know. There's this thing in this women's field this year where it's like a break needs to have a certain amount of people to roll away. Just in terms of horsepower, you need probably 4 to 6, and every time they can get one together that's 4 to 6, someone isn't pulling, and then it just breaks down. So it's like
Yeah.
you'll get these ones and twos that do get, I don't know, 10, 20 seconds sometimes, but those are easy to pull back when everyone else gets organized and motivated. So
Right.
yeah, that's been the dynamic. Um, Jumping ahead to the
Yeah.
end of this race, though, I want to talk about this finish. Actually, the last, I don't know, I'm gonna say like 5 laps probably.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
you got something? I've got thoughts. I
No,
rewatched it
yeah,
today.
go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
So we really didn't see much of Legion this whole race. They did only have two riders in the race, like we said, but Miami has been so dominant, and for Denver, this was their home race. So this is the two NCL teams, and really what we saw at the end here was the two NCL teams kind of battling for the front. Like one train would set up with the other behind it. They would do a couple of laps on the front and then swap positions basically. And those two trains fighting each other kind of allowed the Legion girls to sit in the bubble right behind. Like it kept the speed
Yeah.
high the whole time, so there was no lull. and those two trains became like preoccupied with each other. And I mean, some of it is just that Legion, on the women's side has, I don't know, four of the best six sprinters in the country or whatever. So they're
Yeah,
always going to be dangerous in that situation.
yeah,
But I think that's what happened in these closing laps is the Denver train, the Miami train is probably the most able to actually control it. And the Denver train was trying to show out because it's their home race, and they got focused on each other and ended up in the final just absolutely getting scorched by Legion.
yeah. I was gonna say my thoughts on this race weren't from 5 to go. They were from like right here, like 2 to go. Because again, like you're seeing the real battle between Denver and Miami Knights just really going head to head. And then as you can see, I mean, Kendall Ryan was sitting she was doing the Justin thing where she sits like 20th wheel all race and then moves up
Yeah,
towards the
moves
end. And you
up.
can see like she's like sitting there like 7th wheel, like right behind the two trains ready to strike. And
Yeah,
she has a beautiful move that was clean this time
yeah,
towards the end of the race that really helps her get the win there.
yeah, yeah. Totally, no disputing this one. This was a out and out, no deviations, no nothing, clean,
Yeah,
straight up drag race. Yeah, I think people call that the bubble when you're sitting right behind the train because it's like those two trains are fighting each other, and it's always harder to ride in a position where other riders are contesting your position constantly because you're having to
yeah,
kind of like elbow jockey for position, um sort of like think about closing the doors and the corners and things. If you're right behind that, you can stay at a more consistent pace and not be fought as much. And I think that was part of what happened here is she was right in that perfect bubble, which,
yeah.
that Justin is also a master at that. We've seen it in some other ACC races this season where you didn't see him until you really, really did see him. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's how it played out on this women's race.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, she did the same thing that Justin did at I'm gonna draw a blank on this race. Um
Yeah, we
which
watched it.
one?
We
The
talked
one
about it.
yeah.
Salt Lake. Was it Salt Lake?
No, Salt Lake was the
It
one
was
Corey crashed out at. This is earlier in the
yes,
year.
before
And
that.
I'm drawing a blank on which race it was, and someone in the comments is gonna rail us
Yeah.
for not knowing this race. But
Yep.
Justin does the exact same thing Kendall does in that race and gets the win. And
Hmm.
Kendall's basically doing the same exact move, sitting and surfing wheels the whole race. And then when it's time to strike, she does. You don't see her all race until it counts. And
Yeah.
she just makes the perfect move and rolls away with it.
Yeah, this is where it really would have behooved some of the teams. Like, I think if Denver and Miami and I don't know one or two like maybe a butcher box rider like those three could have gotten in a move together and
Yep.
really started rolling and had their teammates really disrupting behind. I think that could have been it, but
Yep.
yeah, Kendall went earlier than I even remembered. She went from
Hmm.
before the last corner and still held. She had like a bike length into the last corner. Really early,
Yeah.
really long sprint.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that was a really good move from her. She kind of calculated the Lukeland parity thing at Nationals where she kind of knew, like, okay, if I go from this corner, I can kind of take the right line and roll it. That's I don't want to spoil the men's race, but we also saw a similar thing in the men's race.
Right, right. Lauren Zorner was one of the other cyclocross racers I wanted to mention on that women's side. I've
Gotcha.
always
Yeah.
gotta mention all of the cross racers because
Right.
I think there's a big correlation between being a good cross racer and that translates to almost any other discipline. I think it's so hard
Yeah.
and it's such good like concentrated skills work.
Yep.
Moving over to the men's race, we're gonna have to start talking about it pretty early because
Yeah. Right.
it kicked off very early in this one. You wanna get into it?
Yeah. Let's go ahead. So, Littleton, Denver, like Denver Disruptors really wanted to show out for this race as it being their home ACC race. And they delivered on that. Riley Sheehan rolls off the front for like, what was it, 20 minutes really early on.
Yeah,
Um,
he I'm looking at 3 minutes right here, and he's already got a gap. I think
yeah,
he went 2 minutes in. He went hard, and I think it really caught everybody out a little bit. It was
yeah,
definitely an unexpected move,
yeah.
and
Because
I
I don't
think
even
getting back,
think. Sorry, I don't think even in any of the ACC races we've seen moves even being tried within the first 5 to 10 laps of a race like that. So, I mean, this is before 5 laps, right? So this is.
right?
I think everyone was like completely caught off guard here.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen people going hard early in the race, but we haven't seen
Yeah,
anyone get separation like this. And I think
right.
there's a difference between the kind of going hard that's like, yeah, I was doing 500 watts on every straightaway for the first 5 minutes, and like what Riley did, which is I think like a full attack. Like I think he did like
Yeah,
a race end sprint, at the end of the first lap from, five
yeah,
wheels back. I
yeah,
don't think I really saw him launch on the stream. You just kind of saw it cut from one angle to the next angle, and he was, 4 or 5 bike lengths up the road. And none of the teams had really like gotten together and formed up on the front yet, so no one kind of
yeah,
had control in that moment. That was maybe the
yeah,
only time we saw Justin in this race too, Justin
yeah.
Williams.
Let's say we saw Justin on the front early on for Legion, and like, yeah, after that we don't really see him as much, which was crazy for Justin to be on the front because he's usually not. He's usually more of a protected role. So I think that's sort of a testament to how off guard everyone was. Where
Yeah.
Legion on the radios are like, okay, Justin, you're closest to the front. We need you up there. Um,
And I think some people might look at this move and go like, what are you doing? Because it did come back about
yeah,
20, 25 minutes in. The Sheehan move did come back, but I think it really put Legion in the box in a way that we've been talking about. I feel like we got at least one comment early on where we said something about how like these teams have to start putting Legion on the back foot from the jump and making them
yep,
chase, even if
yep,
Legion is very organized in doing the chasing. In this men's race, they did have a full squad too of 6 riders.
yeah,
Um, but and someone commented and was said something about like, I don't know, just disagreeing with us and thinking that that was a dumb move because Legion does always bring it back. But my point about that is not so much that that move works, it's that you have to start burning through some of that firepower in these shorter
hmm,
races. You have to do that from minute one because
yep.
there's not that much race.
Right. It goes down to the concept of you have so many kilojoules you can pedal in an hour. And so
Mm-hmm.
you want to use up as many of those kilojoules on all the Legion guys as you can as early as possible. So they're not
Mm-hmm.
as able to control the race at the business end of the race.
Right.
Um, and that's what we finally start to see as these teams figuring that out. Maybe they always knew but didn't execute it, but now
Or
they're
didn't have the
executing it.
firepower.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
and
mean,
now they're really executing it.
I think we have more teams that have like the budget and the training and all
Yep,
of that to get it done now. Looking at
yep,
the results list, I think it's just as interesting. Like, I don't want to jump necessarily to the end of the race this soon, but I do want to mention some of the DNFs. And I was looking at this earlier, and I think I see a correlation in the DNFs. This is another thing where someone's going to be in the comments with a rebuttal, but
right.
okay, I'm noticing a lot of people that we've talked about a lot this season. Jeremiah Stoller, Dante Young, Corey Williams, Kyle Murphy. That makes sense. We will see him doing a lot of work later on.
Yep,
Justin Williams, Thomas Gibbons, a lot of these. Uh, Brendan Rim. One thing I think that off the top of my head, all of those have in common is they are from sea level ish, and or
yep,
have been racing and training at sea level, most of this season. And I think that again, I don't know everyone's like travel schedule. Someone is going to comment and be like, "You're wrong
right,
because John Stevenson, who races for local pizza racing, was 12th, and he flew out the day before from
right.
he lives below sea level."
He lives in
It, it,
Miami. And
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
right,
exactly. And
right.
there's going to be one of those guys, but this is what I'm saying is I think that the a lot of those guys I listed are like bigger, like powerhouse type dudes who are also
Yep.
from sea level. And so I think
Yep.
when you are one of those like big FTP riders, you're just taking in and processing a lot of air and you're coming straight from sea level. And I think most of them, this is the riders I listed partially because they were DNFs and they're big names, and partially because like you can see their social media, and if they had done like a big altitude camp beforehand or just gone up a week beforehand to acclimate or whatever, you'd
Yep.
probably see a post or two, and I didn't. So my thought is that most of those are guys who came in a day before, a couple of days before, which is not
Yeah.
long enough to
I mean,
acclimate. Or
yeah. There's a lot of commonality in several of those people who DNF'd have won Speed Week or ACC races this
yeah,
season as well. Like these are not like
totally.
we talk about them a lot, and it's not because they're necessarily domestiques. These are guys who are putting in leadership positions to win, and
Hmm.
they're DNFing this one. And yeah, the altitude I think plays a big part. But like Thomas Gibbons lives and trains in Boulder, which I don't know the elevation difference between Littleton and Boulder, but I think they're both
It's
around a mile ish
pretty
high.
similar.
Yeah,
I guess I had that wrong in my mind because Gibbons was down here. He was living in Georgia, like in the Athens area for a
yeah,
while. So I guess I still think of him as like a sea level dude, but
yeah,
he's not. But also, I don't know what his travel schedule has been exactly.
yeah.
And I
I
don't
know
know
he's been
exactly.
doing, yeah. Sorry, he's been doing a lot of track stuff, so it's very possible he was going to tracks that are, faster, which
Right, which are,
which
yeah,
is
lower.
yeah, because like the way the air pressure density, like on all the stuff they nerd out about on the track, like this track is the fastest track ever, is
Hmm.
like not at elevation. So it's possible he's kind of focused that way and hasn't been in Boulder as much or at elevation as much this year.
Yeah. But the point I'm making is that Riley is from elevation.
Yep.
So I think he's got that kind of like the Colombian guys we see that like grew up at elevation and have more of that adaptation. When they go to when the stage races go to the high mountains, that's when the Colombian guys, even if
Right.
they're way off on GC, they just have one of those like amazing days. And I think that's some of it is they're like in their wheelhouse a little bit, and I think that's where
Right.
Riley and some of these other riders were too. I mean, I noticed like right the second Riley got brought back, there was a Empire rider, and they are what, Utah based.
Salt Lake City. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that got up there right at the same time, and we're looking at a Cliff Drifters, also a High Mountains team. So yeah, just like an
Yep.
interesting factor that I wanted to talk about in this race a little bit. I think that did play into it. Um, but
Yeah. For
the
sure.
so for this one, Riley gets the Combativity Award. Spoiler alert: he
Unequivocally.
did not win the race,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
unequivocally, definitely gets the Combativity Award for this one.
Yeah. He's been on a tear all season, and he seems to be only getting better. And the
Yeah,
season's been going for 6 months now, which is most guys have peaked and they're kind of on the decline, and he seems to only be getting better, which is scary
yeah,
for everyone.
yeah. That's that interesting thing that I was talking about. Is like you're seeing, not that we haven't seen him, and like I've thought maybe he was going to get a result here or there earlier in the season, but it hasn't panned out. But this is the most we've seen him like affect the race, just kind of like nuking the race.
Yeah.
So yeah, want to give him that. He got plenty of TV time, but yeah, definitely got to give him the shout out for that. So once he got brought back, there was a little bit of a, I don't want to say return to status quo, but like the racing went more like the racing has been going, with the one of those things being that around 30-35 minutes in, the entire automatic train moves to the front and just started ripping it basically right after the mid race points preem.
Yeah.
I was able to confirm a theory. I think we've talked about this on multiple races, but the question has been like, why are they setting up like a full lead out basically around the midpoint of the race? And I talked to one of their riders who did say like, yeah, the idea is the hope is that we would split it right after the around the time of the points preem.
Sure.
And I think like it didn't necessarily work this time, but that's another like I don't think it's a bad plan. Again, like I think you got to
Yeah.
try stuff like this, and who's to say like certainly it put Legion on the back foot at least for some period of time. Like you do not see them organized on the front even for like I don't know 5 or 10 minutes after this move was tried. So
Right.
you got to
And
try
I
stuff.
think,
You got to go hard.
yeah, and these making it hard after the point sprint works better on a course that's less of a drag race than Littleton is.
Yeah.
Like on a slower, more technical course, I mean, that would really catch a lot of people out.
Or even if the wind is kicked up. I mean, that's like a
Yeah,
thing.
true.
So you could say like, oh, they should look at this course and know not to try that. But like, I don't know, it could start getting windy, and then
Yeah,
that becomes the smartest tactic of all time. And also, it's just like if
right,
that's the card you have to play, you got to play it.
right. And like with the forecast, it's entirely possible you start kicking 20-mile-an-hour winds because it is Colorado, right? And so
Hmm.
like it's entirely possible you see like an echelon situation where like we've seen that in Tour de France where echelons cause GC havoc. And so it's entirely
Hmm.
possible then they look like geniuses when they have four guys
Right.
in like a split of 15 people. You know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, they've been trying a lot of these kind of like high risk, high reward maneuvers this year, and when it has worked, like at Athens where they
mhm.
pulled the breakaway close enough and then Tom jumped across and then that breakaway lapped up. They let it go back out. They
Yeah.
that did look like a genius move. So
Yeah,
that's that just is what it is. Um
for sure.
yeah, Robin Carpenter trying to go up the road solo. I think anytime you see Legion trying to go on the move rather than covering moves, you kind of know that like they're on the back foot a little bit. Like their game
Yeah.
plan has been turned on its head. So getting into the final quarter of this race, it really was looking I don't want to say chaotic, but Legion did start to form up on the front with about 8 to go, and it started
Yeah.
looking a lot more like how these races normally look, with one notable exception, which is that once they lined up Legion on the front, I did not see Justin or Corey on the back of that train.
No, right. And that's where when we were watching it, you're kind of thinking, okay, is it gonna like who's going for the win here? Because like
Right.
usually in that situation, it's gonna be Justin or Corey, and with them not being present, it's almost kind of like if I'm Legion, maybe I let somebody else take up the pacemaking, and they do a little bit with letting Miami Knights sort of come around the train and let them do a lot of the pacemaking, but
Yeah,
that
Knights
opens
just
the
took it.
door for yeah.
They
Go
took
ahead.
it too early. This
Yeah,
was a game of people taking it too early because Miami tried to take it from around 10 to go, but they didn't even have their whole team there. So we're looking at three Miami in
yeah.
front of a full Legion train. And then Legion takes it over from them around 7, I believe. But
Hmm.
then Legion is up. I've skipped a thing I definitely wanted to talk about, which is Brian
Right.
Gomez with 7 to go. Stuff starts happening with 7 to go. Legion takes the front, and we're looking at Brian Gomez walking with his tire hanging from his disc rotor. Like his entire tire blew off the rim. He slid out in the corner, and it looked like someone ran over his front wheel, but also I'm not sure if that was a hookless fail. We're seeing hookless rims now, and I know they're on Vision. I don't know if the Vision rims are hookless. Like I poked around a little
Yeah.
bit and tried to see. exactly what rim and tire combination they're running, but there's a whole thing now where there are hookless rims and you have to run hookless tires with them. They don't have the literally the hook on the inside of the rim that holds the tire. And then there are some tires that are hookless specific. So I don't know if he had a bad combo. I don't know if this was hookless related in any way, but I feel like it's kind of like the beginning of when tubeless first came out. Like when tubeless, like gravel and cyclocross tubeless first came out, it wasn't that good. Like I had a few tires
Right.
burp off the rim
Yep.
because it just took years of engineering for the standards to be like, all right, this is how we're shaping the hook and this is how we're shaping the bead on the tire.
Yeah.
So
And that
yeah.
literally took all of the wheel manufacturers and all of the tire manufacturers in a singular meeting to be like, this is going to be the standard. Like this is the ETRTO standards.
Hmm.
And like that's what it took for the quality to like get to where it is now on that.
And
And
I
in the
think we
road, it's a
saw,
little bit of the Wild West still
yeah,
with the road
I,
tubeless stuff.
yeah, especially with the hookless thing. Like there
Yeah.
was, I believe it was not Perry Nice, one of the cobbled classics this year. Somebody ran, maybe it was Arenberg Forest, like hit the cobbles and it just looked like their tire exploded off the rim. And that
Yep.
one was like confirmed. It was, hookless tire, hookless rim. But yeah, I've seen a lot of crashes. I've seen a lot of people crash on tubeless rims, and I don't think I've ever seen someone walking around with the whole tire just like off the rim like that. Maybe it
Yeah.
was the specific way somebody ran it over, but I don't know. I've seen a lot of front wheels get run over too. Anyway, he
Yeah.
got back in the race and then had another viral incident where he was pushed up on the sidewalk. There's some helmet cam footage of that floating around. Go,
Yeah.
find that GoPro footage. But
Clever. It's on Clever's YouTube.
yeah,
Like, and it's he
Gomez gets
like
pushed wide. He bunny
yeah,
hops up onto he slides, bunny hops onto the curb, straightens back out, and just comes back down. That was after the crash we've seen.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yes.
wild race for him.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
like this race from like 10 to go was crazy. 5 to go gets even crazier.
it
It
was
was really
nutty.
hectic. Yeah. Like again, this is the first race I think where we've really gotten to see ACG, Legion, Denver, Miami, Butcher Box, all of these teams.
There was the sidewalk thing.
Yeah.
I just saw it happen. Keep talking. I'm gonna play
Yeah.
it again.
Okay. So this is the first race I think that we've really truly seen Legion, ACG, Butcher Box, Miami, Denver, like all of those like A level teams
Hmm.
really all their trains really battling it out at the end of the race.
Hmm.
And it creates like some really hectic situations. A lot of folks are bumping elbows, like chopping corners. It made the last 5 race laps of this race extremely like the entertainment value is high, but like the racing, it made it like a true like drag race. Like everyone was just going crazy.
Yeah, it did seem like everyone did a good job though of like there was contact, but no one
Yeah,
nothing untoward happened. Even the getting pushed
yeah,
up onto the sidewalk thing, like everybody made it out clean, made it out alive.
yeah, yeah. I guess
This
like the
was
thing that I think a lot of people talk about is like if it's contact and started, like contact's going to happen in a crit race. It's
mhm.
like what happens after that that matters, and like all these teams did a really good job of racing aggressively but racing clean. And when there was contact, like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll give you a little bit of space because like we're all going 40 miles an hour, right?
Yeah,
Um, so this is like the first race of that where like I really think the trains were able to battle it out cleanly.
yeah. We did have a little bit of a different makeup of the Legion squad at this one. We had Kyle Murphy, who we haven't seen a ton of in these ACG races. He's coming over from Rally last year, but he's
Yep.
he was a fixed gear like Red Hook crit guy back in the day.
Yep.
So he's not inexperienced, but maybe hasn't done as much of this in recent years, coming
Yep.
from longer stuff. We also had Eddie Ferrer, who maybe I just haven't noticed him, but I feel like we haven't seen him as much. And then Sam Boardman, who's
Hmm.
always the workhorse. But no Ty Magner in this one. Yeah,
Yep.
they took it. They took the front and lost Justin, lost Corey with around 5 to go, and then they've got 4 laps to go and 3 guys on the front, which is not a great recipe. So you kind of knew something
Nope.
was going to happen in the end.
Yeah. We've seen this a lot lately with Legion going to the front a little too soon or not being fully organized and burning their race with because they're not bringing enough guys to the front. And that's really what happens with this race is it's either mistimed or they're not fully organized and they sort of lose control because they don't have enough horsepower on the front at the truly business end of the bike race when you really need all 5 or 6 guys going at 100%.
Yeah, I think some of it here was the altitude, and some of it was also just the fact that like other teams have come closer to their level, and even if there's not, maybe I don't think there is one team that is like as good as Legion right now, but there are like 5 teams that are like within striking distance, and when all of those
Yep.
teams are really firing on all cylinders, challenging them, throwing haymakers, that's going to make them work harder. It's definitely not the days when we would see them take the front of the race in the first 10 laps and be able to just control it the whole way through. And when they were able
Yep.
to do that, you could say like, well, they were taking the race at 10 laps in back then and they were fine. The difference is that if no one was trying to come over the top of them and send like serious moves up the road consistently, they were able to ride. They had 2 guys whose job it was to ride 90% of the race at their, you know, 30-minute time trial power when they were taking their pulls. So they
Yep.
knew they could sustain that pace. And as long as those 2 guys were riding that sustainable pace and the guys behind them were just letting each other slot back in, it was a very comfortable ride where they weren't fighting and they weren't going over what they knew they could do. But now people are making them work for it. And speaking of Denver being their home race again, they kind of mob Legion and take over around the end of 2 laps to go. And we were
Yep.
talking before. We have a tendency to do this to like we have some of the conversation that should be the podcast when we're just talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
That was the impetus
Like
for the podcast is we're always talking about it. But
yeah, usually
yeah,
when we're organizing our show notes is when we have our brightest ideas and like best conversation about the race.
right.
And then we lose some of that in the actual show. But yeah, with Denver coming to the front early on, you see Janssen and Rensburg there and Riley Sheehan's up there. And they're just like obviously like Miami Knights is the first wheel now, but there's no
Hmm.
one from Miami Knights directly behind him. So it's really a disruptors lead out. And
Yeah, it's getting super chaotic. I mean, all the trains are battling
yeah,
each other, like you said. I also want to
yeah,
point out, I feel like Fury in the national championship leaders jersey, he's really pulling a Fury here, which is that he's always he
yeah,
other than the national championship hasn't had any like big podium results, but he's always in that sort of like 4 to 10 zone, finishing super
right,
strong. I'm
right.
gonna just start calling that pulling a Fury,
I
pulling a
think
Monk.
Yeah, I think if Miami Blazers had a little bit of a stronger roster, he'd be on the podium at most of these races. But he just doesn't quite have that support that some of the other key sprinters have to really seal the deal.
Right. So you before the podcast, this is what you
Yeah,
mentioned is you weren't sure if Sheehan goes back to the front, hero of the day on the last lap, and you weren't sure whether he was trying to do a lead out here and actually got a gap just like ripping these
yeah,
corners so hard doing his lead out, or if he was trying to win the race. But he looks back and he's like, oh, I got a gap. All right, let's go.
yeah, yeah. So there was Jans Van Rensburg right there on his wheel, but then Van Rensburg comes off in that corner, and it could have just been because she had ripped it so hard, but then Van Rensburg is nowhere to be found, and Para's right there on his wheel and comes around and wins. But there's a little bit of like a concern because Riley kind of pointed at his bike towards the
Oh
end.
yeah. I
Yeah,
heard that maybe his gears were slipping or something in the sprint, like from the final
yeah,
corner to the line.
yeah. There was like
Something.
something. There was something going on because I think Riley like would have won this race, but there's a mechanical issue, and it kind of ended his day, which
Yeah,
sucked because
that's a bummer.
that was gonna be a hell of a win. But then Para's trying to lead out Summerhill, and
Right.
because Para was the only guy who could hold Sheehan's wheel in that corner, and then he ends up taking the win instead of Summerhill.
And I don't think Para was trying to. Yeah, he was trying to lead Summerhill out. He was not
Yeah,
trying to win the race, but it was just win because he was trying to get in position, and because Riley got that gap a little bit early. Para was just the first guy to realize, like, oh, I've got to chase that down, or else Riley's just gonna ride away from us. He jumped into that gap, and then
right.
whatever it was happened with Riley. I still feel like tolerances on 12 speed are a little bit tight. It's a little too fiddly for me, and
Yeah,
I'm gonna blame the 12 speed. I think he
I've
got between gears or something.
I've said that when mountain bike 12 speed first came around and everyone was snapping chains, and I said
Yeah.
these chains are a little bit too thin.
Hmm.
And then when I was riding a 12 speed drivetrain, I was like, this is a little bit too finicky.
Yeah.
And now it's back on the road, and tolerances on the road are even tighter than they are on a mountain bike,
Hmm.
and it's just starting to feel that way, like little things happening, and we see it at this level at the World Tour. It's 11 speeds perfect in my opinion.
I
I'll just
agree.
be honest. I'll just be
Yeah.
honest.
I we were riding yesterday with someone who was vehemently defending, like, this 12 speed is the best thing I've ever ridden, blah blah. So, don't at me, but I
Yeah,
do think seeing a lot more drop chains. It happens with every cycle, though. I mean, it's like when a new iPhone comes out, it's buggy, and then they kind of like work
yeah,
the bugs out. But
yeah.
so probably in 2 years, the 12 speed will be better, but they'll also be pushing, there will be some new thing that's 12 speed will be beat. So if I'm buying
Right,
12 speed, people will be looking at me like I've got the outdated technology.
right, right.
I think you could race most of these races on, mechanical 10 Ultegra and be fine though. Like even at the
Mhm.
this top level.
I mean, as long as you have a 5311, you're fine.
Yeah, I
Like,
don't think that would slow you down any.
no, not at all.
Anyway, moving on. I thought maybe we'd get this whole episode done in 45 minutes, and here we are.
We've talked about
Coming up to
Littleton for
45.
45
Yeah,
minutes.
we've only talked about Littleton, but NCL Denver was the next week, which Littleton is basically Denver, it seems.
Yeah,
So two races in the same area, not all the same teams, but some of the same teams. And we're going to talk about the men first here. NCL has this whole different thing going on. They changed a lot of things from the Miami race to this race. I don't know if this is like a permanent change or if they're gonna swap. In Miami, the men raced second, and in Denver, the women race second. I don't know if they're gonna keep. I kind of like it if they keep swapping
they're
those back and forth.
they're swapping them back and forth because the Atlanta
Okay,
schedule has the women first.
yeah, I
So
I think that's a good move with
I agree.
the way these races. It's all points based. All of the points go into a team bucket. I would think if you're tuned into this show, we've talked about NCL enough that we're the premier source for NCL discussion at this point. I think,
Yeah,
especially like just like nerding out on the specifics of the rules. Yeah. So getting into this men's race first. So all of the points the men are scoring go into a bucket, and then the women start with those points. So it kind of makes whoever
yeah,
races second, you know, it can go either way. Either that's super exciting because they're clinching the race, or it's mathematically already locked up, and then it's kind of boring for the second race. So I think it's
yeah,
good that they're swapping them.
yeah. I
But
agree. And sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, but the men started this one off, so here we
Oh,
are looking at the men.
gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think. this Denver race was a lot more exciting than the Miami race. Like we said this early on. I mean, it's been so long since we had an NCL race. We
Yeah.
said it after the Miami race. We were like, hey, look, like in the corporate world, like you pilot something before you actually like launch it. And so that, in my opinion, that was like kind of the pilot, right? And I think they
Yeah.
realized, okay, four corners doesn't really work. They bring this in. There's like a U-turn. There's tons of corners. There's a little bit of elevation change. Nothing crazy, but there is a little bit of a hill. Um,
Hmm.
and it makes the racing a lot more exciting because it's not a drag race.
Yeah. I also think because there's a sprint on every lap, and this is a pretty long lap,
Yep.
it made it a little bit more. There was like the right ratio of like rest to attacking each lap. There's also some
Mhm.
wind on this one because this is, you know, on this kind of wide open. There's not a lot of tree cover, and it's just kind of a windy day in Colorado. So
Mhm.
it was definitely a hard day, and the race on this men's side was blowing apart a little bit. They made a lot of changes though, so I'm gonna run down the ones I noticed, and I
Okay.
think all of them were improvements. The grid start, which I think we said, and a lot of people said it was a good idea. The gridded start where you qualify and your qualifier gets you placed in the grid at a certain position didn't have a huge effect. The start position in that first race, I still think it could, depending on who gets the good gridding and how they play it out. But they've
Yep.
added some stakes to that qualifier by attaching some points to it. So now I believe
Yep.
you get 10 for winning the qualifier. So it's like 10 down to 1, which that's a decent amount of points to get before the race
Yeah, for
because
sure. And it was applied men's and women's. So the women's qualifier brought in a certain amount of points, and the men's qualifier did as well, if I'm
yeah,
remembering correctly. So,
I think you're
like,
right, and it might be 5 and 5, so it's like 10
yeah,
total.
yeah, because I think
Well,
the Miami Knights brought in 8 points total. So I think
yeah,
like
so it
they
was like
won
five
one
and
and they
three.
got second and one or something. So it
Sure.
was, and they don't stream the qualifiers, so it's a little bit tricky to like know exactly what's going on. They do it on Instagram Live, which I'm not a Zoomer, so like Instagram Live, I'm not watching Instagram Live,
Yeah.
um, and so
Yeah,
it's a
I'm over
little tricky,
25, so I don't do Instagram live.
right? So it's a little tricky, but I think that adds an element to it because a team can defend that, grow on it, and
Well, it just makes
just
it
raises the
it makes it
stakes.
matter more. That I
Yeah.
think that was the criticism a lot of people had is like why are we jumping through the hoops of doing this qualifier if, immediately it's going to reshuffle out of the grid.
Yep.
Um Again, depending on what the course looks like, what the start looks like, that it might not always play out like that, but I think that was a good way to also spread some points out because
Yep.
the points go a little deeper on that qualifier. There's still only 3, 2, 1 across the line every time.
Yep.
So I mean, if you're getting points on that qualifier, it's significant. If they were coming in with 8 points just from the qualifier, that's the same thing as winning 2 laps and then getting second on a lap.
Yep.
In this men's race, we saw a lot more dynamic racing than what we saw in Miami, and I think you know the points were helpful in making it more interesting, but also the course and the wind and all of the teams seem to have a better handle on the substitution thing. So I think
Yeah.
that's another that was a little bit smoothed out. Now, I saw some discussion from people that were there that were saying that like maybe there wasn't a great handle on like dropping and pulling people was getting a little hairy. Like people who were maybe should have been pulled were like finding their way back into the race by subbing out and subbing back in. And it seemed like depending on how fast the group was going, you could maybe gain time by pitting. And I think most of the teams were realizing that and then pitting every lap. Like,
Yeah. And they made that clear in the broadcast. Frankie Andreu was like, hey, I think the break's getting like 2 seconds every time they pit. So
Right.
he's like, so they're going to pit every lap. And sure enough,
Yeah.
they pitted every single lap because they sort of like
Yeah.
realized there's a little cheat code there.
I wonder how much of that though is that if you're coming in on fresh legs and you're sprinting out of the pit, like how much of that is free and how much of that is costing you, like you have fresh legs and you're sprinting, so it's like I don't know. It definitely it's an interesting wrinkle to the race, and as long as they keep it, as long as everyone understands what the parameters are and everybody's kind of following the rules correctly, I think it's like, an interesting thing to let play out. But yeah, I saw breakaways
Yep.
where like guys were subbing in and out of the breakaway, and that was how it was staying up the road. Um, I
Yeah.
I guess we can't give the combativity award to the entire Texas Roadhouse team here, but
Yep.
I, they
I
they had a
mean,
great race.
I would I would give okay because NCL is team based. I think we can give a combativity award
Oh
to a
yeah,
whole
maybe we
team
can.
at an NCL race, and I think Texas Roadhouse is the men's combativity winner because
Yeah, for sure.
and
They had Kyle
we
Perry
said
early.
this. Yep, Cal Perry early, then Eli House. Like they rode a phenomenal race, and we kind of mentioned that we didn't just mention it; we harped on it was that
Hmm.
Texas Roadhouse is going to be the other team that figures out this format and can like actually race the race as intended. And that's what we saw this time was they
Yeah,
really honed in and figured out the substitution system and the point system and like there were moments in this race where they were possibly going to pull ahead and win like mathematically could win the race.
yeah. They got within mathematical striking distance by the end of the men's race, especially Eli House. Okay, here's the thing that so we haven't said this outright because I guess it's kind of understood, but the two NCL teams dominating the NCL races. And I
Yeah.
think, some of that is that they are focused on them, some of that is that they're it just the most high budget teams that are doing these races. Some of it is that they are have had the most like thought into the format. They're coaches. This becomes a very director heavy format when you are deciding when to sub people in and out, and your rider in the pit needs to know when to be ready. And yeah, there's a lot of communication that goes on, and I think those NCL uh, directors are more aware of that stuff. But having said
Yeah.
all that, we're going to talk around the NCL teams because, of course, they were super dominant.
Yeah.
Um, so when Texas Roadhouse figured out multiple ways to kind of pick points up throughout this race. Kyle Perry early was getting in some of the sprints. They had some other guys getting in moves later, but a big one was Eli House, who went probably with like 9 to go, something like that, and was up the
Yeah.
road. He could have pulled out a lot more points though if the other teams. So in my mind, that's a big opportunity if you're one of the teams behind that is not the two NCL teams, Miami and Denver. The onus is kind of on them to chase,
Yep.
and I would hope that what you would make them do is do the chasing and then try to just nip them in the sprint every time. But that was not what happened. So Texas Roadhouse was winning the laps. They were getting the 3 points, but Denver and Miami were trading off getting the 2 and 1 behind. So like the lead
Yeah.
wasn't growing that quickly. Like if Texas had been stacking those and Denver and Miami had been getting shut out or even just sometimes getting beaten for those points behind, that would have been a very different mathematically very different race by the end.
Yeah, and that's the criticism, in my opinion, on the points format as it stands. Like with the allocation of points, like I think first it should not be mathematically possible for a team to get the same amount of points as the person who wins if they go 2 and 3. Like I think it should be like 5, 3, and 1, so that way first place is always getting more points total than the second and third place team, right?
I still think it might be interesting if the points went maybe five deep or something.
Yeah,
Um, But I don't know. Maybe if we had that, I'm saying that because like right now what we're looking at, Mike's Bikes had a rider in fourth who was, did a lot of work but shut out of the points. I think
Yep.
we would see a much different leaderboard if this race had played out the same way, but fourth and fifth had been getting points. Maybe if we
Yeah.
did that, Denver and Miami would just be putting riders into fourth and fifth and sweeping up those
Right.
points too.
Right.
But I don't know. It does seem like NCL is like open to these tweaks, and a lot of the things
Mhm.
we've talked about are things that like the first race happened, they saw how it played out, and they made some small adjustments. And I don't think this is a finished product yet. I think we're seeing iterations. I did think there were some things that were like there was some better and some worse at this race. I thought that we were seeing more of the in and out of the pit action, which helped me wrap my mind around what was going on in the race. That was
Yep.
better. There were a lot of interstitial interviews that they were cutting to, and then we would miss the sprint. And I thought that was maybe a not as good. I get that they're trying to provide more context with the interviews, but I
Yep.
didn't feel like I was seeing the action as much, which like seeing a bunch of sprints is kind of in my mind that's what they've been proposing as the value proposition, right?
Right. Like their whole value prop is action on every lap. And so when you pan over to the director of Kelly Benefits during like 500 meters from the line, you're kind of like, mm,
Yeah.
maybe you could have
Mm-hmm.
waited until they crossed the line, right?
Right.
But I do appreciate the intermittent interviews. Like I think them talking to some of the directors mid race was provided some value, and
Right.
having somebody in the pits providing that extra context, showing. I wish it was someone who knew a little bit more about bike racing to like provide the
Mm-hmm.
content, like so they weren't like getting corrected by Frankie Andreu and Brad Stoner, but
Right.
like
But I think
they
they're
did
gonna
provide
get
some
there.
helpful context. Yeah, for
Right.
sure.
It's a new like step one was adding those, figuring out where to like cut those interviews in. The
Yeah.
next step is going to be like kind of honing what those interview questions are and kind of like, making that stuff more relevant. I did see some people, someone, on this YouTube channel was complaining to me about the Wahoo ad that was basically intercut as an interview, and I think that's basically going to be unavoidable. Like
Mhm.
I don't have as much beef with that, but that was in there as a.
Yeah.
There were definitely some what do they call it? Like product integration type things. I
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me too much as long as the racing is good. Which I think it
Yeah. It's
was. I
like
mean, I enjoyed watching this one.
yeah, it's like if you ever watch 30 Rock and they do like the mock or like product integration or like promo. It was
Yeah.
basically like the same concept, and I don't hate it. Like in my opinion, if having a 30-second Wahoo blurb in the middle of a lap keeps the stream up or whatever, fine.
Yeah. It
I'd rather
honestly
have
makes
that than no stream.
totally. It makes more sense than a lot of the other things that we've heard as maybe the potential business model here for NCL. And
Yep.
like again, I want the NCL to like, keep, if only for the sake of those teams being like some well-funded teams that are racing big schedules all over and have made the quality of American racing higher,
Yep.
made, more riders are able to get a living. I want to see it continue. And if that's the thing that does it, I'll sit through
All right.
someone explaining that the head unit tells you what speed you're going. Like
So
it's whatever.
yeah. So I've got a hot take here about the
Okay,
coverage.
sure.
All right. This is way better coverage because Medalist Sports didn't do it.
Ooh, all right.
All right, here's my thought. So the Miami
Yeah.
race, they missed a lot of the sprints. You had like this. Medalist Sports has like set camera angles that works in a national championship road race. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work in a crit. They were missed like in the Miami race. They missed a lot of some of the key moments and a lot of the key things that were happening. And the gripe people had was they couldn't follow the race. They couldn't tell what was going on. And I think a lot of that was due to
Yeah,
the camera angles and positions and the way that Medalist was cutting to certain cameras. I think whoever did this race, and they had it in the tech guide they sent me, and I'm drawing a blank, but whoever did the coverage on this race did a fantastic job because you always knew what was going on. They had different angles, and I think the drone shots were great, and they had the every lap that they showed for the sprint, you saw a head on situation, and you could kind of tell what was going on.
it was
Um,
definitely a lot of drone footage, which I've had mixed feelings on, but I do think that if you're trying to be like the new, innovative league, having so much drone footage, like it does just look different. So,
yeah,
I could
the
see that being the brand.
the only gripe on the coverage was the final sprint on the last lap, which had some drama associated with it. Um,
Yeah, there
like
was a big
the
deviation.
yeah, the coverage was from behind and it was at plane level, so you couldn't tell who was who won or was even ahead. That was
Yeah.
the only gripe I had throughout the whole coverage was
To
that
be
one sprint.
fair, I think on that sprint, it was insanely close. Anyway, we're talking about the sprint
Yeah,
finish of the men's race here. Uh, it was extremely close. And Jan van Rensburg on the front has a pretty hard left to right deviation. I thought maybe he was going to get relegated. It wasn't a quick deviation, but he covered a lot of ground left to right.
yeah,
He ended up just having lost it though. Uh,
yeah.
didn't get it in the end. And notice I'm not listing who did win. It was someone on Miami Knights. It wasn't
Alfredo
Clever Martinez.
Rodriguez.
It was Rodriguez. Okay,
Alfredo. Yeah,
this is a gripe I do have though. I was going back and trying to look at who scored what points and um just trying to like parse these races and how they went down. And at least on the NCL results page, like there's not. I feel like early they promised all of this like online interactivity and stuff, and
hmm
again they're like working on it, they're iterating on it, but it is not there yet, and it is frustrating that like I've pretty much just got a list of points. I don't have like who scored what points and what laps, and like I get that they're trying to make it more palatable to the non-fan, but also like, you know, as someone who wants to geek out on that stuff, I want access to it.
yeah. Maybe that's an us problem because we're both like really nerdy and detail oriented when it comes to
Yeah.
like results and that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
maybe that's an us problem, but I agree with you. Like, I want to see a spreadsheet that shows Leah Kirchman scored these points on these laps. And so I can get like a holistic view of like who the most valuable person on each team is points wise, right?
And I feel like I've seen that in like graphics that will flash up while you're watching the race here
Yeah.
and there, but
Yeah.
like it'd be great if that lived somewhere we could just get to. I feel like maybe I even saw it after the Miami race somewhere on the website, but I was poking around and
It's,
could not find it again
yeah.
after that.
Like, they definitely have that data. I just don't know why they're not publicizing it.
Sure. On the women's side, I'll say we've got a little bit less to say about this one as a race because Denver and Miami just destroyed it as you would expect, and also they were coming in. Miami was coming in with a lead because they did get that victory in the men's race, and to go back to the points change, 30 points on the finish line for men now, which I think that was a criticism we had. Plenty of other people had after the first race was that it made it a little bit anticlimactic that the final sprint didn't have much weight attached to it, and it feels
Yeah.
like they heard that and they, you know, 10x the points on the last lap, or at least for the winning position on the last lap, and that does
Yeah.
make it a little bit more exciting. That puts even if you're not within mathematical striking distance of the win, any of the teams below could move into third with that, and the two teams that are the NCL teams, basically that's the linchpin for the race for them.
Yeah. Like there's new leadership at the NCL. And so I think they're just a little bit more open to some of that criticism, making sure that it's a palatable race to the people who are watching and care about it. And I think, like you said, it's we said it earlier, it's only going to get better. And I think it improved by a significant margin for this race.
Yeah. So we had crash. We did mention a couple of things. Crash in the men's from a Super Bars rider. Hope he's all right really early on. I think we had a
Yeah.
crash from a Super Bars rider on the women's side early on, but um, I want to give their women the Combativity Award. Might be the wrong. Maybe we need to come up with a different thing for this, but I feel like sort of like unsung hero award, or maybe it was burning their own matches. I don't know, but I felt like
Yeah.
I was seeing. I think it was maybe Debbie Milne. It was like almost every time after the sprint. I'm looking at it right now. You see a Super Bars rider. I think it's Milne, just like welding it back together, welding it back together, welding it back
Yeah.
together, just doing so much work.
Yeah. I wanted to acknowledge Super Bars in general as a team. Like we had talked to Wesley Alford like back at Speed Week, and he mentioned, yeah, the substitution thing. Like we've got a strategy now. We've got it figured out. And I
Mm-hmm.
think they raced this race a lot better. Than like they're not a big budget team. They're a little bit undergunned. They don't quite have the horsepower, and I think, as a team, rode above their weight as a whole, men
Yeah.
and women, this weekend.
I think on the men's side, having that, it seemed like their strategy on the men's side was to be very aggressive early on, and one of their
Yeah.
riders crashed on the first lap, I think. And so I think that put them on the back foot a little bit in the men's race, where, their guy who had worked really hard to get good position crashed. And then even if you can sub someone in for them at that point, you've lost that good positioning, and then you've lost a rider that you can sub in and out. So,
Yep.
kind of threw their strategy in the air. I'm excited to at Atlanta get more eyes on like how the substitution, because I do understand if you're a rider is just going into the pit, there's a mat they cross, and then the other rider gets released. I don't understand if a rider crashes, at what point does the rider going in from them, in for them, in their place, get to go in? Because obviously you're not going to wait for them to cross the mat. I don't know. I just want to see
Right.
how some of this, like, is it just being left up to the officials on the ground, or is there a procedure for it?
I
I want to
think
see how some of that stuff's working.
according to the rule book, they go in at the same place. So if that rider's in the main group, that person goes when the main group crosses the line. Or if
Right.
they're in a break, same thing. And I think, which, I mean, if you have a big crash of like 3 or 4 people, like that's got to be hectic, right? So
Yeah.
I don't
It
want
can
to
be
see
hard
a
to
big
nail that.
crash. Yeah, like I don't want to see a big crash, but I am curious to see how a situation like that would be handled and just get more context on what's going on at the races as a whole. So,
Hmm.
really excited to go to Atlanta and kind of get a little more context and understanding as to what's going on.
Yeah. So to sort of close out the state of where we are after this race, Denver had won one. If they had won this one also, they would be in the running for that Triple Crown prize money bonus, the whole thing that we talked about earlier in the season.
Yeah,
Miami took this one, so that takes that off the table. But it does mean that coming into this last race, the Miami versus Denver, who takes the season thing is still up in the air. And I want to say Texas Roadhouse has that third spot locked down. So then there's going to be kind of a best of the rest below them that I think is still actually pretty tight. And I'm like kind of interested to see who gets fourth among everyone else down there. I feel
yeah,
like some of those teams are still putting it together on the men or the women's side. You know, how many riders are they going to have? We're going to be back at sea level, so I think we may see some different individual riders having good races that
yeah.
didn't here. Maybe some different rosters altogether. It's going to be on the Porsche track next week, which I think is similarly a long lap to this one. So I'm
Yep,
wondering if that's going to. I think that works better for this format.
I agree. Before we leave the NCL discussion, I'm gonna do my due diligence on this because I said I would, even though it's kind of past. Last episode, I made a mistake. The new the new CEO of the NCL is Andrea Panginelli. Nikki Tickner Strickland has not been involved with the NCL in any way, shape, or form. And then Paris Wallace has stepped down to a president role, so he's still in the C-suite, but not as the he's not steering the ship as much.
Got it.
And with the new leadership change, I think Andrea has been a little more receptive to some of the things that have been changing, and it's really exciting to see the changes that she's already started to implement with the NCL. And I think we'll see even more at Atlanta, and I think they continue to improve.
Yeah, I think this race, it's certainly different from the product that was promised in the very beginning in the sense that it's not. It seems like we're moving away from the city center thing. It seems like the online data interactivity, that's not here yet. But the product that we have is, I think, compelling racing to watch. I'm interested to have, something that's breaking up the ACC. I think in a season, I think if this was the season where Legion had been so dominant, we would be like, thank God we have these NCL races so that there's like a
Right.
different thing to watch, where different people are coming to the fore. But yeah, I thought this was a fun race to watch. I'm interested to see how it goes next week for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, yeah, the NCL races have been fun to watch, and they'll continue to be fun to watch. And Atlanta's going to be really fun. If you see us, come say hey. Um, and yeah, just looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I thought we would get done in under an hour. We're still at an hour 12. So yeah,
You know, it is what it is.
it is what it
We,
is.
we had a lot to talk about, so
Yeah.
you know,
This is why we do the podcast is because we get into it and we talk about it a lot. So we wanted to you know, get that analysis out there or whatever.
right.
Yeah, so we're gonna continue to have shows. We got more races coming up. This season is closing down. But yeah, we will be out there in Atlanta and
Yeah,
hopefully have some fun stuff. Even once the racing is over, I think we got some ideas about some interesting episodes that we're gonna be
yeah,
sprinkling in through the off season as well. So
yeah.
as always, very last thing I'm gonna say is now that everybody's turned it off, is like and subscribe and all that stuff.
There we go. All right. Peace, y'all.
See you guys later. Thanks.